As you walk into the library, this time you have a very specific purpose in mind. Not leisurely scrolling, but looking for documents that can help you defeat vampires and survive in the City of Night. You pick up the first book. It's titled Big Red. A long time ago, when the Hell's Gates had just closed and the moon was still low and the last of the Crimson folk walked amongst men, there was a small village hidden in the mountains, much like in those other stories. Now a forest surrounded this hamlet, leaves thick as human hands and branches interlocking like so many pointed spears. It was rumored that the forest belonged to an ancient beast, remnants of the Red Ones, who had yet to return, with the face of a bear and the claws of a hawk and the body of a woman, with teeth that were more delighted to feast on innocent villagers. So it was rather good fortune that there was only one way in and one way out of the forest, and that old sage who had been there for a rather long time had guarded it. He had been there in his little log cabin even before the oldest villager was born, and the oldest villager heard that the sage had been there in his little log cabin even before the oldest villager in his time was born, and back and back and back. The consensus was that he had been there since time immemorial, keeping the red beast sated in its wooden prison with his otherworldly experience and accumulated skill. The symbols etched onto the stones, the patches of rusted red in the grass, all played their arcane and eldritch part in keeping the village safe from the beast. And they said from time to time, if you cocked your head just right, you could hear the beast pacing about the forest, its breath red with anticipation of escape. But the old sage was not all-powerful, and every year, at the height of the night and the low of the full moon, so he said, his charms would weaken and the beast would grow hungry. And all the villagers did note that at that time of the year, the goats were found with their throats slashed and blood drained dry. Or the soil cry salty tears of crimson, and they believed the old sage. The beast was getting out, and the only thing that would keep it in was the heart of a human child. And every year, when the moon shone darkly and the night breathed with red, the villagers, with heavy hearts, would deliver the youngest newborn to the door of the little log cabin, rap once or twice on its scorched oaken door, and depart quietly before they saw the deed being done. It was cruel and caused much unhappiness, but it worked, and the livestock was safe, and the ground no longer shed tears. Now, one day, there came to this village a lonely traveler who had left his wealth, infamy, and pursuers behind in an attempt to start his life anew. He knew not of the red folk, or the beast of the mystic charms, nor of the ritual of the longest night. And when he heard of the story of the beast and its guardian, he remarked, "Utter tales of folly. Why? To believe an old fool like him and the yearns that he speaks of. Tonight, I will confront him with a sword and make him reveal his deception." The villagers were mortified at this traveler's defiance, but chose to let it pass. How could a mere air-headed youngster stand a chance against the complex charms and witchcraft of the old sage? "He would be gone by midnight," proclaimed the artisan. "If the beast hadn't gotten him yet," chimed in the butcher. And everyone laughed at how such a young, rash mind would surely deserve such an unfortunate consequence. Despite all of this, the traveler set out at night for the thick forest, gorged on good drink and good cheer. Past the rows of marked charms, through the yawning stone arch, over the river that cried with sirens' voices, he arrived at the little log cabin with a sharpened sword in hand. Now what happened next, no one knows. But what everyone knows is that the traveler came back soon after, his hands and face stained bright red, and his eyes shot with madness. "I have killed him," he cried, "slain the treacherous beast which plagued this land." And he spoke of the old sage, and how he had answered the door, and how the sage had smiled, a flash of red, a hawk's claw. He spoke even as the villagers strung him up, spoke of skins hanging from walls, little human skins, and a flash of red, and how he swung blindly again and again, spoke at the noose tightening around his neck, spoke of a bear's roar, a flash of red, and the sage had laid dead before him. That was when he spoke no more, but the villagers paid his words no heed. Then he stopped twitching, and they cut him down the next day and buried him in a sallow ditch. The next year, the ground did not bleed, the goats did not die, and the moon hung high in the midnight sky. You closed the book and put it back on the shelf. This wasn't exactly what you thought it would be about, and it definitely isn't what you were looking for. As you go to pick up the next book, a small paper falls out in between two books. It's a small poem titled Fading. I see her through the veil of youth, a human soul like me. Come, now dear, let us dress you. Come now. Dear, let us feed you. What a fearful thing to be. Oh, to die a final death. To die while I'm still a young man. Let me die while I'm still grown. No, not to turn a child once again. To fade, not die away. For all of our cures, for all of our power, is this world a better place than when we died at 28? Young, but still awaiting fate, with joy and will of youth. There is a sickness no cure cures, and it is not mortality. Death is sure sickness, not, but an end. For all of us it comes, a kind release. No, of something else I speak, with wringing a mind of form. For my Creator it has come, and for the lucky it will too. Thus I fear to onwards live. Death I do not fear, hell I do. Not fear. I fear to lose my growth, to be a child, waiting, with power lost in shaking hands. Death comes for us all, but it should not have to wait. The poem reminds you of someone that you used to know long ago, but it cannot help you with your current quest, or them. You pick up the next book, called Worship Death. If this doesn't remind you of a vampire, then you don't know what else does. In the thralls of death, existence was forfeit. A faceless entity, something all-consuming in its presence. To think about it, to even begin to try and comprehend it, was, in itself, an act of vandalism to its very nature. Something that takes life, something that brings sentience to the edge of nothingness. I cannot speak of it as it controls over the dead souls it collects, just as I cannot speak of the consciousness of infinity. If I had to wager a guess, I would be no more than a month old. I felt and saw and thought and tasted and cried and did all of these things that a baby would do when confronted with such an incomprehensible scene. I was an infant, though my consciousness was at least aware of the fact that I was nothing more than an impaired spirit, fumbling with loose grasps and broken buttons of a useless vessel. A useless vessel that backed at the jaws of death's precursor. With the role of a spectator, I felt more aware of the infant's senses, though perhaps it was more appropriate to say that they were my own. Dry straw rubbed against my soft skin, scratching and itching as I jostled about in a tantrum. My throat strained to its limits as my lungs expanded gasps of air for frightened screams and tears. Through it all, I could make it out. A large, bulky man with a thick chest full of hair and dressed in nothing more than a loincloth. He stared down at me with blinking eyes and pointed a rock over his head. A thin layer of red blood coated it, light droplets falling from its tip. I could hear screaming somewhere, screams that were not my own, that brought with it candid suffering, images of a savage death, much like the one that I was about to experience. The man grunted, the rock swung down, and there was a bright sense of redness. It dissipated soon after, leaving behind something a bit more sensible. A single moment passed, and I was staring at a large brown mass of meat and fur, a mammoth. I suddenly understood that it was something that I had hunted many times before in the past. Floods of memories rushed into my brain, a lifetime worth of experiences. The mammoth was a huge reservoir of meat, something that symbolized many days of survival, gifts of warmth and food. Only this one was different somehow. Pale patches of naked skin jutted out from its swollen lumps, some of which were wet with yellow pus that brought with it clouds of flies. Blood steadily leaked out from its body, from various wounds, some caused by members of my hunting group, some that were there when we found it. I looked around myself, along with my vessel. I stared with the feelings of pounding anxiety, heart thumping against my ribcage in its tribal drawn rhythm, as if it was trying to escape. Bodies, 8 in total, with limbs bent in awkward positions, with crushed torsos and fountains of red, with senses of it. Death in the air. The mammoth's eyes were bloodshot. I could see bits of flesh and skin sticking to its legs, clinging onto its fur as it slowly approached me. A scream expelled itself from my chest, and I drew back my arm, which held a shaft of a broken makeshift spear. It charged then, an overbearing mass of brown that slowly turned black as it expanded and expanded and expanded and expanded, and I could not breathe. I could not move. There was only a numbing across my chest and a faint sense of prickling in my legs that made me desperately want to itch it. Alas, I had not the strength nor the means to do so. Death had come once more, and it was on to the next. Many of my deaths were not so interesting, at least not for the first few million. There was an uncomfortable number of lives to go through, to witness the ends of and truly understand the artistic works of death. Yet there was an infinite amount of time to expend. I was kept suspended within an expansive black ocean of sorts, fully submerged and paralyzed, while my mind wandered in fragmented pieces. I could reorganize myself, a corpse awaiting the next stage of life. It had been a foolish accident, as many deaths in the modern era were. I'd been driving down an empty highway during a night late enough to be considered morning. My body was running on fumes, a meager meal of instant ramen from 2 days prior and about 30 minutes of sleep. I didn't know how long I fell asleep for, but when I woke up, I became aware of what I've become and what I must endure. That one death would not be enough. Ahead of me, the endless staircase of anguish with its rich history of violence, bloodshed, and pestilence. It was a death-given task, only meant to clean the vestige of corruption from my soul, so that I could properly move on. So I suffered, as I should. There was a time where I was being carried through the air, a strong scent of blood and gore permeating a red mist. Frigid burns marked my belly, where 2 spears had pierced through my flesh. A pair of soldiers, dressed in clunky steel, were holding me up, jostling my soon-to-be corpse around in the air as they sang loudly into the dead air. I could not blink. I could not speak. There was only the magnitudes of black pain coursing through my body, as every part of me turned rigid with shock. I was marred with the splatters of blood, some of which were not my own, and there was but only a mere dagger hanging loosely in my grasp as I was paraded around the battlefield. An endless desert, plain of war, of suffering, thousands of dead bodies, and there I was, high enough to see it all, as the last vestiges of my life left my body. Once, I came to myself lying on the dirt floor of an old, run-down cottage. The rancid stench of vomit and diarrhea made it nearly impossible to breathe. I could only lie there, sobbing and whispering nonsensical ramblings to God as sharp, gnawing pains racked my gut. gangrene rot had developed on my hands, and whenever I tried to crawl, my arms would only flail about uselessly, scratching at the ground with black fingernails. Every drop of sweat felt like a bead of lava, making its way down my taut skin with a terrible slowness. Impaled through a wooden stake and left out in the open, drowned at sea after a fishing accident, caved in and forced to starve in the dark. Once, I was walking through a cobblestone streets of London, with autumn's chilling wind nipping at my cheeks. My body trembled as I took a step forward, after through the veil of night, my skinny frame feeling the full effects of the cold through thin layers of cloth. I had just about made it to the viewing distance of my residence, a run-down lodging house within the decrepit slums of Whitechapel, when a pair of gloved hands reached out from around an alleyway and pulled me in. I was caught staring at an impassive face, barely visible in the dim moonlight. His mouth was drawn to a taut line, and his eyes were entirely unfeeling, more akin to glass marbles. He shoved me roughly against the wall and produced a large knife from underneath his sleeve. I tried to cry out, but the blade quickly found its way to my throat, effectively stealing away my breath. Again and again his knife went, penetrating through my abdomen in rapid succession. Every time he pulled away, small spurts of blood would dribble out onto my clothes. With every thrust, he would exhale through his nose or twist the knife within my body, the pain of which my brain struggled to comprehend. I tried to scream, but it came out as a gurgle, muffled by a mouthful of blood and foaming spittle. Unfortunately, I didn't have the luxury of dying of old age too many times. The pain never got better. Each death was experienced as if it was my first. I often found myself calling to God, to death, sometimes even the devil himself. Anything to take me away from this trial of eternal agony and suffering. But there was no response. Of course, I can only imagine how many pleas they must hear on a daily basis. But more than once, I thought to myself, if only there was nothing after death. If only my consciousness could cease to exist. If only I could spend the rest of existence in non-existence. I think I would prefer it that way. I wouldn't have the means to process it anyway. It would be immortal bliss, an infinite amount of lifetimes extinguished in exchange for pure, unadulterated nothingness. No more worries, no more suffering. I couldn't possibly fathom death's motives for such a macabre ritual. Perhaps there was a bigger reason to all of this, something that an insignificant speck such as myself couldn't even begin to understand. There were no thoughts in my mind about reason, however, only the desperate wish for it all to end. If I had the choice, I would have likely refused the gift of a new life altogether. It wouldn't be worth it. At least, not with an ever-expanding chain and ball that so firmly gripped my leg. One death, in particular, I could so recall vividly. I saw myself through the eyes of a woman, screaming and clutching at someone's trembling hands as an unbelievable knot of pressure strangled my lower half. Red, sticky blood painted my inner thighs. Somewhere in the background, a doctor shouted in an incomprehensible tone, which only served to alleviate the raw pain coursing through my body like a current. I pushed and pushed and pushed, each and every second contraction sending me deeper and deeper into the bottomless spiral of radiant lights, blinding me, deafening me. I could feel the rushing current of blood through my veins, practically boiling as my body collapsed onto itself. I recall with burning intensity, worship death. My subconscious had said it with such clarity that it temporarily broke through the scene, leaving me numb. The numbness was a gift of grace, though it only lasted a mere second. I took it as a sign. Something parted unto me by a higher being, something that told me that I was the only one on the right path. Of course, I was not in the right state of mind to accept anything as a fact. I was desperate, reaching at the end of my line with nothing to face but the face of hell. I would have taken any rope thrown, no matter how thin, no matter how barbed, no matter if it was just a piece of string conjured up by the thoughts of madness. And so I finished my task. So many deaths. And I lived through them all. The last death that I experienced was, of course, my latest. It felt cool, calm, collected. I was in my car, driving down a road that I had driven down hundreds of times before, and I knew exactly what awaited me at the end. Although part of my mind was crippled by hunger and sleep deprivation, the other part of me knew that it would all end well enough. When my eyes began to fall heavy, I did nothing to resist it. When I felt the dull threads of sleep pull me away from reality, from everything wrong in this world, I felt nothing but peace. I knew then I returned to the black, inky abyss of death's embrace, though this time there was warmth. I found myself slowly burning away, only it pleasant. A nice buzzing feeling that was enveloping my body as I prepared to, at last, take my part in life once more. Of course, once I die, it will be one more death that I will have to experience, one more flight of stairs added to infinity. I only hope that I'll handle it better the next time around. As you close the books, you cringe a little bit. You couldn't imagine a fate much worse than this. And yet, here you see the diary of one with such a terrible, terrible existence. As you put the book down, you finally found what you had been looking for this entire time. A smile spreads across your face as you can finally put an end to the thing that you had been hunting, or rather had been hunting you, for months on end at this point. Excerpts from the Saint Emile's Bestiary, Chapter 11, on the Common Vampire. Introduction. The common vampire, or the Vampire Dracule, dwells in the interior of Europe, most often in the foothills of Carpathian Mountains. All vampires of the world share several basic similarities. The current model of understanding, divined through a careful dissection and comparison, has led me to believe that the common vampire is the common ancestor of all other vampire species. While all other vampire species have adaptations suited for their environments, the common vampire is the only one with no defining, unique characteristics. Indeed, its notability comes from the fact that it is the template of sorts for other vampire species to be modeled off of. Understanding the anatomy and weaknesses of even the common vampire will give you an advantage over all species of such you may encounter in your travels, the importance of which cannot be overstated. Even the banal common vampire is many times more powerful than a human and possesses a significant danger in combat. I suggest that you use this chapter to arm yourself with the knowledge that might one day save your life. Anatomy. The Vampire Dracule is largely similar in shape and form to the Homo sapiens sapiens, an erected biped with a wingspan roughly equivalent to its height. The most obvious feature discerning them from a human is the shape of their hands. The vampire's hands are claw-like, with long, hard nails extending for up to 2 centimeters, often sharpened to a point. The muscles in these hands are taut and powerful. They can be quickly contracted to exert immense pressure on anything the vampires grasp. This ability is commonly used to crush the skulls or bones of its prey. Naturally, the vampire's teeth are a second source of notability. The fangs of a vampire are the stuff of legend, and it is difficult to extradite the myth from facts. Dissection of the adult specimens have noted that sexual dimorphism in the dental region, While males have 2 score and 8 teeth to females 2 score, they are less dangerous. For the males can be described as fangs, both front-facing, 2 on top and 2 on bottom, each a centimeter above the gum line. Comparatively, females have 8 fangs, 4 in front and 2 on each side. Her front fangs are up to 1.5 centimeters above the gum line. The legends have preserved one important bit of truth regarding the fangs. They are almost exclusively used to suck the blood of the vampire's prey. They bite into the flesh, most often the neck or thigh, and the vampire uses its lips to create a seal around the incisions before sucking. However, study of their feeding habits has led me to an intriguing discovery. As soon as the beast separates itself from its prey, its saliva soothes the wound and encourages faster clotting. While this is pure speculation, your author theorizes that this is an adaptation to preserve the life of the prey in order to remain a consistent food source. Throughout its body, the tissue of the vampire is tight and strong. Even its skin resisted the dissection from my sharpest scalpels. There is little to no fatty tissue found anywhere on its body. After thorough inspection, I believe that this is due to the unique nature of its diet. The musculature, it's powerful, and it allows the vampire to perform feats of strength beyond the capabilities of humans, such as high leaps or climbing sheer rock faces. It also provides the creatures with an edge in close combat. Although despite this, I have noticed that vampires of all kinds, not just Draculae, shy away from personal combat. Indeed, combat altogether seems to be avoided. Study into this is ongoing. The oculus is an important part of notability. Survivors of vampires' captivity report that looking into the eyes of one puts you into a fag, unable to resist or combat any suggestion by the vampire, slaves to its will. Post-mortem dissection of the vampire reveals no outstanding differences from human eyes, and the author is led to believe that this is due to the sheer intimidating presence of the vampire, coupled with confusion and lightheadedness that naturally follows a victim losing a large amount of their blood. The innards of a vampire also fail to distinguish themselves from human in structure. However, I have noticed a phenomenon present in nearly every specimen dissected. Namely, a black mold or fungus found across several organs, particularly in long-living members of the Draculae. I remain unsure of the origin or the effects of such a mold, but I have collected several samples and have preserved them in a cache for future study. Diet. The diet of the common vampire is quite simple, and is another of the few truths present in the numerous legends and myths surrounding the species. V. Draculae subsists itself almost entirely on the blood of living organisms. Near all creatures are possibly prey for it, but the vampire presents a preference for the flesh and blood of humans. Whenever possible, it will seek out this food source over easier to acquire alternatives. However, if put against the threat of starvation, a vampire will begrudgingly feed from rats, cattle, fowl, swine, and other creatures unrecorded. The distinction appears to be mental. Subsisting off the blood of animals presents no visible damage to the health of vampires studied in captivity. Vampires have been consuming, in gluttonous amounts I might add, ale, wines, meat, cooked meat, raw meat, bread, cheese, human flesh, and in rare cases, other vampires. However, the only foodstuffs needed for survival is blood. Behavior. The common vampire is as a wolf among sheep. It seeks to live amongst its prey, acquiring note and power to better safeguard its tenacious position in the world of humans. Vampires are oft found at the highest echelons of society. Nobles, bankmakers, men of means. The massive castles and towers of old have given it away in new layers. Manors and estates filled with humans to serve and feed from. This is the manner of self-preservation. By disguising itself to appear though human, the vampire secures its position in the epicenter of the world, and it masks its tracks from its own predators. Hunting. A smile spreads across your face once again, and you are grateful that you were able to find this book before it found you. That predator is, of course, you. The vampire will never truly be human. No matter how well constructed the facade, the beast will seep through the cracks, appearing in the slightest of movements. A fanged smile here, a predatory hunger at the sight of an opened wound or cut there. To an untrained eye, these actions are invisible, but to the educated hunter, these are like a deer leaving prints in the freshly fallen snow. Mistakes, accidents, hints, it does not even realize that it has left. Watch for these. They can be the difference between life and death. The slaying of the vampire is an extraordinarily difficult task, mostly due to its uniquely resistant body. Again, some legends hold true. The easiest way to eliminate a vampire is a stake driven entirely through the heart. This is less a weakness of the vampire and more of all beings. A hunter would be hard-pressed to find an entity that survives such a fatal wound. The composition of the stake is irrelevant. I've seen wooden spears, metal lances, and once even a sharpened human bone successfully be the end of a vampire's long life. Aside from the stake, beheading also functions, though it is obviously more difficult to accomplish. Routing the vampire into a position in which you can stake or behead them, though is the most difficult part of hunting, is the only known way to get rid of them. They will have both human securities and beastly ones. Expect to be engaged in a long, slow battle with increasingly difficult enemies. A hunt I undertook in Paris several years ago lasted a staggering 3 months. The beast had built itself up as an eminent Persian socialite with an estate on the river. I masqueraded as a visiting English minor lord, and had finally sprung my attack during one of its parties. I set the mansion aflame, and, during the chaos, drove a burning length of oak through its back. This, I have come to find, is a particularly efficient strategy, both literally and metaphorically. Ideally, the beast will never know it is being hunted until the moment its world goes up in flames, and it finds a stake through its heart. This is the ultimate platitude and lesson of hunting the vampires, friend. Find them, study them, and then, once they are truly at their most vulnerable, set them alight and drive a stake through its chest. Have no mercy. Just like they would have none when sucking on your throat as you hang from its chains in the dungeons, should you fail. With that final note, you prepare yourself to leave. It is odd. The book mentions nothing of a vampire that would hunt you, but now that you know what to do, you quickly realize that it is time to change your face once more. It's a shame. You had grown rather attached to this one, but identities never led to a long life. Not for anyone. As you begin to leave, you see a love poem, discarded in a Chinese food container. Ever the scholar you were, you pick it up to absorb its information into your well of knowledge that you collected today. Lilac dew drips softly, peppering my skin. Here I sit, lighting up sen, thinking of you. How could this be? Heads translocated under heels. You've taken me apart, scattered, dried, peeled, down to its constitutes. You drive me insane, thoughts gone pink, barreled down like a train, I can barely think. When I dream of our pain, soothed, salved, stalled, stained, and styled, our minds flow in ecstasy, should schedules allow, and grants us their blessing. I'm falling in love again and again. You can see why this was thrown in the trash. You put it back where you found it, and you make your way to the left wing of the library. It's time that you made a new face for yourself.